The rain was hitting the windows harder now, making that steady drumming sound that usually helped him focus. But tonight was different. Tonight, nothing seemed to be working right. Alex sat at his computer staring at the same design he'd been working on for the past 3 hours. The coffee had gone cold and the house felt emptier than usual. 3 months. That's how long it had been since he'd been living alone in this place. 3 months since his world had turned upside down. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the clock. 9:30. Most people would be watching TV or getting ready for bed, but Alex had gotten used to working late. It helped him avoid thinking too much about how quiet everything was. The house creaked in that way old houses do, especially when the weather was bad. Alex had learned all its sounds by now. The way the pipes rattled when the wind was strong. The soft settling noise the wooden floors made as the temperature dropped at night. He knew every sound this place made. That's why he noticed immediately when something was different. There was a soft click from the front of the house. Not the usual house noises. This was something else. Something that made him stop typing and listen carefully. Then he heard it. The unmistakable sound of his front door opening. Alex felt his heart skip a beat. He sat perfectly still, listening. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the wind had somehow blown the door open. But no, that wasn't possible. He always kept it locked. Always. Ever since the divorce papers were signed, he'd become very careful about locking everything. The sound of footsteps came next. Soft, deliberate footsteps on his hardwood floor. Someone was definitely in his house. Alex's mind raced through possibilities. His ex-wife had returned her keys weeks ago. He'd watched her put them on the kitchen counter and walk out without looking back. His parents lived 2 states away. His few close friends always called before coming over. He stood up slowly, trying not to make his chair squeak. His phone was charging on the nightstand in his bedroom, too far away to be helpful right now. He grabbed the first thing he could find that might work as protection, a heavy glass paperweight from his desk. The footsteps were moving through his living room now, calm and unhurried. Whoever this was didn't seem to be in any rush or trying to hide their presence. That was almost more unsettling than if they'd been sneaking around. Alex crept toward his office door and peered out into the hallway. From there he could see part of the living room, but the angle wasn't quite right to see who was there. The footsteps had stopped. Taking a deep breath, he decided he had to face whatever this was. Maybe it was someone who needed help. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. He walked down the hallway, the paperweight still clutched in his hand, though he wasn't sure he'd actually be able to use it if he needed to. When he turned the corner into his living room, Alex stopped dead in his tracks. It was a woman he recognized but barely knew. She lived somewhere on his street. He'd seen her in her front yard sometimes, usually tending to her flower garden. They'd exchanged polite waves over the past year, the kind of neighborly acknowledgement that happens when you see the same person regularly, but have never actually spoken. But seeing her in his living room, in his space, was completely surreal. She was standing near his couch, and as he watched, she was carefully removing a wet jacket. Her movements were slow and purposeful, like she was performing some kind of ritual. She folded the jacket and placed it on the back of his chair, then unwound a long scarf from around her neck. The scarf joined the jacket. Then she pulled off a thick sweater, revealing a simple shirt underneath. Each item of wet clothing was removed with the same careful attention, as if this was the most natural thing in the world to be doing in a stranger's living room. Alex realized he was still holding the paperweight and slowly set it down on a nearby table. This didn't feel threatening exactly, but it was certainly the strangest thing that had happened to him in a very long time. The woman seemed to sense his presence and turned toward him. When their eyes met, she smiled. It wasn't an embarrassed smile or an apologetic one. It was confident, knowing, like she was sharing a secret that only she understood. "I thought it was time we properly met," she said, her voice warm and steady. Alex opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was trying to process what was happening. How had she gotten in? Why was she here? And why did she seem so completely comfortable in his space? "Your door was unlocked," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "I hope you don't mind that I came in out of the rain." Unlocked? That couldn't be right. Alex never forgot to lock his door. Never. It had become an obsession since he'd been living alone. Every night before bed, he checked it twice. Every time he came home, he locked it immediately behind him, But as he thought about it, he realized he couldn't actually remember locking it tonight. He'd been so distracted by work, so lost in his own thoughts that his usual routine might have gotten forgotten. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I mean, we don't really know each other." She tilted her head slightly, still wearing that knowing smile. "Don't we, though? I've been watching you take your evening walks for months, every night around 10:30 when you can't sleep. You walk the same route, down Maple Street, around the park, back up Oak Avenue." Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. She was right. He did take those walks and always at the same time. But he'd thought he was being discreet about it. He'd thought no one was paying attention. "You stop at the bench by the pond sometimes," she continued. "You sit there for exactly 7 minutes, then you come home. You've been doing it since sometime in June. June, that was when his ex-wife had moved out. When the house had started feeling too big and too quiet. When sleep had become something that happened in short, restless stretches instead of the solid 8 hours he used to get. I take walks too," she said simply. "Same time, different route. But I've seen you." She moved toward his couch and sat down, making herself comfortable. "I'm sorry about your divorce. I know it's been hard." The word divorce hung in the air between them. Alex hadn't told any of his neighbors about it. He'd tried to keep his personal business private, but apparently he hadn't been as successful at that as he'd thought. "How did you?" he started to ask. "Small neighborhood," she said gently. "People notice when someone moves out. People notice when someone starts walking alone at night looking like the weight of the world is on their shoulders." Alex sat down heavily in the chair across from her. The strangeness of the situation was starting to give way to something else, a kind of relief he hadn't expected. For 3 months he'd felt invisible, like he was going through the motions of living without anyone really seeing him. But this woman, his neighbor whose name he still didn't know, had been seeing him all along. The silence stretched between them for what felt like forever. Alex stared at this woman who somehow knew so much about his life, while she sat comfortably on his couch like they were old friends. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. "I'm Maya," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "I live in the blue house with the white shutters. 2 doors down from you." Alex nodded slowly. He knew the house she meant. He'd always thought it looked cheerful compared to the others on the street, with its bright flower boxes and well-maintained garden. "I'm Alex," he said, though something told him she already knew that too. Maya reached down and slipped off her shoes, placing them neatly beside the couch. The simple action somehow made everything feel more real, more normal. Like having unexpected visitors remove their wet shoes in your living room was perfectly ordinary. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said, her voice matter-of-fact but carrying a weight that made Alex's chest tighten. "Car accident on Highway 95. He was coming home from work on a Tuesday evening and then suddenly he wasn't coming home at all." Alex felt the air leave his lungs. He'd been so caught up in his own problems, his own loneliness, that he'd never considered what might be happening in the houses around him. "I'm so sorry," he said, and meant it completely. Maya nodded and began removing her jewelry, first her earrings, then a silver bracelet, placing each piece carefully on the coffee table. "Thank you." People say that a lot and most of them mean it, but after a while you realize that sorry doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring anyone back and it doesn't make the empty space in your bed any less empty. She reached up and pulled the elastic band from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. The gesture was casual, but Alex sensed there was something deeper happening, like she was shedding more than just accessories. "The thing nobody tells you about losing someone," Maya continued, "is how much energy it takes to pretend you're okay. Every day, you have to put on this performance for everyone around you. You have to smile at the grocery store and make small talk with the mailman and act like you're healing properly. Whatever that means." Alex understood that feeling more than he cared to admit. After his marriage ended, he'd spent months pretending everything was fine, telling people at work that he was doing better and that the divorce was for the best. But late at night, when the house was quiet and there was no one to perform for, the truth was much harder to bear. "But watching you on those walks," Maya said, "I realized I wasn't the only one carrying something heavy. You move like someone who's lost something too." "My marriage," Alex said quietly, though I guess it was more like watching something die slowly over several years. By the time we actually split up, there wasn't much left to mourn. Maya leaned back into the couch cushions, pulling her legs up under her. She looked more relaxed now, more like herself and less like someone playing a role. How long were you married? 8 years. We met in college, got married young, thought we had it all figured out. Alex found himself talking more easily than he had in months. There was something about Maya's directness that made honesty feel natural. But somewhere along the way, we became strangers living in the same house. She had her life, I had mine, and we just went through the motions. Did you try to fix it? Alex thought about all the counseling sessions, the awkward date nights, the conversations that went nowhere. We tried everything except actually talking to each other about what was really wrong. It was easier to blame busy schedules and different interests than to admit we'd grown into people who didn't really like each other anymore. Maya nodded knowingly. My husband and I went through something similar, actually. The last 2 years of our marriage, we were more like roommates than partners. We were polite and considerate, but there wasn't much real connection left. This surprised Alex. From the outside, he'd always assumed that people who lost their spouses had perfect relationships. That grief was simpler when love was pure and uncomplicated. I feel guilty saying that now, Maya continued, like I'm dishonoring his memory or something. But the truth is, I've been lonely for a lot longer than 6 months. Losing him was devastating, but I'd already lost the person I married years before he died. The honesty in her words hit Alex like a punch to the chest. He'd never heard anyone articulate that particular kind of loss so clearly. The way you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. Is that why you've been watching me? He asked. Maya smiled that knowing smile again. I've been watching everyone, actually. When you can't sleep, you notice things about your neighbors that you never saw before. Mrs. Chen across the street gets up at 2 a.m. every night to check her locks. The college kid in the apartment above the garage stays up until dawn playing video games. And you take walks when the world feels too heavy to carry inside 4 walls. Alex realized that Maya had been doing her own version of his late-night wandering. While he'd been walking the streets trying to tire himself out enough to sleep, she'd been standing at her window, observing the quiet dramas playing out in the houses around her. I started timing my garden work to when you'd be having your morning coffee on the porch, she admitted. And I may have adjusted my grocery store trips to match yours. I kept thinking that maybe if we bumped into each other enough times, we'd eventually have a real conversation. So why tonight? Alex asked. Why did you finally decide to just walk through my unlocked door? Maya was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Because tonight I realized that both of us were doing the same thing, waiting for permission to stop pretending everything is fine. And sometimes you have to stop waiting and just give yourself permission. Part 3. The Weight of Understanding. The rain had settled into a steady pattern now. No longer the angry downpour that had driven Maya to his door, but a gentle, consistent rhythm that seemed to wrap around the house like a blanket. Alex found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in months. You know what the strangest part is? Maya said, tucking her feet more comfortably under her. I used to be the person everyone came to for advice. At work, in my family, even in my marriage. I was the one who had everything figured out, who could solve problems and make people feel better. Alex poured them both tea from the pot he'd made, noting how natural it felt to be taking care of someone else again. What changed? When Tom died, everyone expected me to fall apart. They were prepared for tears and helplessness and all the things you see in movies about grief. But that's not what happened. Maya wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Instead, I just felt empty, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that made me who I was. She paused, staring into her tea. People don't know how to help you when you're not crying. They can bring casseroles and flowers when you're sobbing, but when you're just hollow, they don't know what to do with that. Alex understood exactly what she meant. After his divorce, people had expected him to be angry or relieved or sad, something definable that they could respond to. But mostly he'd just felt numb, like he was watching his own life happen to someone else. The worst part, Maya continued, was realizing that I'd been feeling empty for a while before Tom died. Our marriage had become so routine, so predictable, that I'd stopped really participating in it. We ate dinner together every night and talked about work and the weather, but we hadn't had a real conversation in years. Did he know how you felt? I think we both knew, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. It's scary to admit that you've grown apart from someone you promised to love forever. It feels like failure. Maya set down her mug and looked directly at Alex. But staying silent about it was an even bigger failure. Alex felt something shift in his chest. For months he'd been carrying guilt about his marriage ending, wondering if he should have fought harder or tried longer. But Maya's words made him realize that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when something isn't working. "I keep wondering if I gave up too easily," he said. "If I should have done more to save my marriage. Were you happy?" Maya asked simply. The question caught Alex off guard. Not whether he'd been content or comfortable or getting by, but whether he'd actually been happy. He thought about those last years of his marriage. The polite conversations, the separate bedrooms, the feeling that he was constantly walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. "No," he said quietly. "I wasn't happy, and neither was she, I think. We were just existing together." Maya nodded. Then maybe ending it wasn't giving up. Maybe it was finally being honest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain. Alex found himself studying Maya's face, noticing things he'd never seen during their brief neighborhood encounters. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the small scar on her chin that caught the lamplight, the laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she'd once smiled much more often than she did now. "Can I ask you something?" Alex said. "Of course. When you walked in here tonight, you seemed so confident. Like you knew exactly what you were doing. But now you're telling me about feeling empty and lost. Which one is real?" Maya considered this, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Both, I guess. I am lost. I do feel empty most of the time. But I also know." As the night grew deeper, Alex noticed something changing in the atmosphere between them. The initial strangeness of Maya's unexpected arrival had given way to something more substantial, a real connection that surprised him with its intensity. Maya had curled up completely on his couch now, her legs tucked under a throw blanket she'd found draped over the arm. She looked more at home in his living room than he'd felt in months. It was strange how someone else's comfort could make your own space feel more welcoming. "I have an idea," Maya said, breaking a comfortable silence that had stretched between them. "And you're probably going to think it's crazy." Alex set down his empty mug and leaned forward. "At this point, I think my definition of crazy has been pretty thoroughly challenged." Maya laughed, and the sound filled something in Alex's chest that he hadn't realized was empty. "Fair point. Okay, here it is. What if we stopped pretending to be strangers? What if we just acknowledged that we see each other? Really see each other?" "What do you mean?" Maya pulled the blanket up to her chin, thinking about how to explain. "I mean, what if instead of doing this dance where we both take lonely walks at the same time but pretend we don't notice each other, we just walk together sometimes? What if instead of both of us sitting alone in our houses feeling isolated, we admitted that we don't have to do that?" Alex felt his heart speed up. There was something both thrilling and terrifying about what she was suggesting. "Are you talking about dating?" "No," Maya said quickly, then paused. "I mean, not necessarily. I don't know if either of us is ready for that kind of relationship, but I'm talking about friendship. Real friendship. The kind where you don't have to pretend everything is fine when it's not." The idea was appealing in ways Alex hadn't expected. He'd been so focused on the romantic aspects of loneliness that he'd forgotten how much he missed simply having someone who understood him. "What would that look like?" he asked. "I don't know exactly. We'd figure it out as we go." Maya shifted position, becoming more animated as she spoke. "Maybe we'd have dinner together sometimes instead of both eating alone. Maybe we'd watch movies or just talk. Maybe we'd take those walks together instead of separately." Alex could picture it, coming home from work to the possibility of company instead of guaranteed solitude. Having someone to share the small moments with, the kind of everyday experiences that felt meaningless when you had no one to share them with. But doubt crept in just as quickly as the hope had. What if we're just two broken people who are avoiding dealing with our real problems? Maya considered this seriously. "That's possible," she said. "But what if we're two people who are tired of being broken alone? What if helping each other heal is better than trying to do it in isolation? What if one of us gets better faster than the other? What if you figure out how to move on with your life and I'm still stuck? What if you're the one who moves on first?" Maya countered. "What if I meet someone new and you feel abandoned? What if we mess this up and make everything worse?" They stared at each other, both aware they were listing all the ways vulnerability could backfire. But somehow, naming the fears made them feel less overwhelming. "I guess the question is," Maya said softly. Are we willing to risk making mistakes if it means we don't have to be alone while we figure things out? Alex thought about his evening routine. Coming home to an empty house, heating up dinner for one, working until he was too tired to think, then lying awake staring at the ceiling. He thought about Maya doing essentially the same thing 2 houses away, both of them existing parallel to each other without connection. There's something I need to tell you, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Something I've never told anyone. Maya waited, her expression encouraging but patient. The last year of my marriage, I used to sit in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Just sitting there, trying to work up the energy to pretend I was happy to be home. The words came out in a rush, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve if he spoke too slowly. I felt like such a fraud. Here I was, living in a nice house with someone who loved me, at least in theory, and all I wanted was to keep driving, to go anywhere that wasn't there. Maya nodded slowly. I used to take long showers at the end of every day. Not because I was dirty, but because it was the only place I could cry without Tom hearing me. Even before he died, I was grieving the marriage we used to have. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. So maybe we are both broken, Alex said, but maybe being broken together is better than being broken alone. Maya smiled, and this time it wasn't knowing or confident or vulnerable. It was simply grateful. I think you might be right. So what do we do now? Alex asked. I think, Maya said, glancing toward the window where the first hints of dawn were beginning to show. We start by admitting that this night happened, that we found each other, even if it was in the strangest possible way. Alex followed her gaze toward the lightening sky. They'd been talking for hours, but it felt like minutes. And then? Then we see what tomorrow looks like when you don't have to face it completely alone. The sunlight streaming through Alex's bedroom curtains felt different than it had in months. Not harsh or accusatory, but gentle, almost welcoming. He lay in bed for a moment, remembering the night before, half convinced he might have dreamed the entire encounter with Maya. But when he walked into his living room, there was proof that it had all been real. The throw blanket was still rumpled on the couch where she'd curled up. 2 empty mugs sat on the coffee table, and on the side table she'd left something he hadn't noticed her carrying, a small leather-bound notebook. Alex picked it up carefully. It was clearly well used, with pages that had been turned many times and a cover worn smooth from handling. A piece of paper was tucked between the pages, with his name written on it in neat handwriting. Alex, the note read. This belonged to Tom. He wrote in it every morning for the last 5 years of his life. Not big thoughts or important revelations, just small observations about his day. I found it after he died and realized how much of his inner world I'd never known about. I thought you might understand why that matters. Take your time with it, but when you're ready, maybe you could share some of your small observations with me. Maya. Alex opened the notebook to a random page. The handwriting was careful and precise. Tuesday, March 15th. The coffee shop got my order wrong again. But the kid behind the counter looked so tired I didn't have the heart to correct him. Sometimes kindness is just accepting someone else's mistakes gracefully. He flipped to another page. Saturday, June 8th. Maya spent all afternoon planting new flowers in the front garden. She gets this focused expression when she's working with her hands like nothing else in the world exists. I used to know all her expressions, but somewhere along the way I stopped paying attention. I should tell her the garden looks beautiful. Alex closed the notebook, feeling like he was holding something sacred. Tom's observations were simple, but they revealed someone who was paying attention to the world around him, even when his marriage was struggling. Over the next few days, Alex found himself writing in the margins and empty pages of Tom's notebook. Not profound insights, but small moments that seemed worth remembering. The mailman always waves at Maya's house, but not mine. I think she probably knows his name. Spent 20 minutes deciding what to have for lunch. Realized I haven't had anyone to discuss meal decisions with in months. A week after that strange rainy night, Alex was working in his front yard when Maya appeared with a small potted plant in her hands. She didn't seem surprised to see him outside, and he wondered if she'd been timing her garden work to coincide with his yard maintenance, the same way she'd done with his morning coffee. Peace offering, she said, holding out the plant. For barging into your house uninvited. You don't need to apologize for that, Alex said, accepting the plant. It was the most interesting evening I've had in years. Maya smiled. Good. Because I was hoping you might want to have another one sometime. Maybe with advance notice this time. I'd like that, Alex said, and realized he meant it completely. Their friendship developed slowly and naturally over the following weeks. Maya would knock on his door some evenings and they'd cook dinner together, both of them surprised by how much easier meal preparation was with company. Other nights, Alex would see lights on in Maya's kitchen and find himself walking over with a bottle of wine or a container of leftovers. They did start taking walks together, trading their separate lonely wanderings for shared conversations under streetlights. Maya showed Alex her favorite route through the neighborhood, pointing out houses where she'd learned bits of her neighbors' stories through months of insomnia-driven observation. Mrs. Rodriguez in the yellow house has been teaching herself piano, Maya told him one night as they paused under a tree. You can hear her practicing scales every morning at 6 a.m. She's getting better. The couple in the corner house fights about money every Sunday night, Alex added. But they always end up laughing about something by the end. You can hear them through the kitchen window. They became witnesses to each other's healing, but also to their setbacks. Some days Maya would cancel their plans because grief had hit her unexpectedly hard. Other days, Alex would be too deep in his own thoughts to be good company. But they learned to be honest about those moments instead of pretending everything was always fine. One evening, about a month after their first meeting, they were sitting on Maya's porch watching the sunset when she turned to him with that same smile she'd worn the night she walked into his house. "What are you thinking about?" Alex asked. "I'm thinking that night when I walked into your house I was convinced I was saving you from your loneliness," Maya said. "But I think maybe we saved each other." Alex thought about the man he'd been a month ago, isolated, going through the motions of living without really participating in his own life. That version of himself felt like someone he'd known long ago. "You know what's strange?" he said. "I feel more like myself than I have in years. Not the person I was trying to become or the person I thought I should be, but just me." Maya nodded. "That's what happens when someone really sees you and doesn't ask you to be different." As the evening settled around them, Alex realized that Maya's unexpected arrival hadn't just interrupted his solitude. It had shown him the difference between being alone and being lonely. He was still single, still figuring out who he was outside of his failed marriage, still taking things one day at a time. But he wasn't doing any of it alone anymore. The title of their story had revealed its true meaning. Maya hadn't just dropped physical layers that first night. She'd shown both of them how to drop the emotional barriers that had been keeping them isolated. Her smile had owned him not possessively, but in the way that truth owns you once you've finally stopped running from it. They'd found something better than romance. They'd found genuine companionship, the kind that makes life feel worth living again.